Why am I here? I'm here to share with you a bit of my story and a bit of my thinking about what is happening in the Middle East, and especially for the Christians in the Middle East, and because I do believe and think that you have something to do with all that. In a globalized world, no country is too far. And what happened in your country, in Ottawa and Quebec, gives some signals to us to say the world is open. And what is happening in the Middle East is not a regional thing that what on earth do we have to do with what is happening in the Middle East? Let them kill each other until they finish. If they can't coexist, if they don't like each other, what do we have to do with that? We like each other and we want to coexist. But I'm saying what is happening in the Middle East is affecting the whole world. And because of that, I'm here. And I'm going to be politically incorrect, just to warn you. And I'm going to ask difficult questions. So, bear with me. And after that, you can hammer me with as many questions as you want. Are we bold enough to name things in their names? Do we have the courage to ask the difficult questions that could challenge us as individuals and challenge our countries, religions, and institutions? I lived through 7 years in hell during the horrific civil war in Lebanon between 1981 and 1988. It was the height of the civil war in Lebanon. And I faced death many times. So I'm not here to theorize. I'm not giving you only theories. I lived every word I'm saying. I know as priests, we rarely live what we preach. But as a speaker tonight, I lived what I'm saying to you. You know that we don't live what we preach, I know. Times like those bring us incredibly close to our mortality. As we realize and experience the fragility of life in a way that pushes us to rethink the whole issue of the meaning and the purpose of life. Having survived all of the years of war in Beirut, I consider that every year after that is a gift from God. It's a bonus. Therefore, I decided to speak out. I decided to break the barriers of fear and silence and to ask the difficult questions that many people avoid. With that in mind, I would like to share with you my thoughts on the escalating events in the Middle East, especially in my homeland, Syria. Before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in the coastal Mediterranean city of Latakia in Syria, in a Christian family. A lot of people, even today, in Europe, they ask me, when did you become Christian, Father? Coming from the Middle East, they suppose that I was a Muslim and converted to Islam. And when I say I've been always Christians, they say, oh, well, then your parents became Christians. That far that they can go, not further. And when I say even my family has been always Christian, oh my God, how? I say, well, before you ask me when I became Christian, Shouldn't I ask you, when did you become Christian? Because to my knowledge, Jesus was born in Syria. Because Palestine at that time was a satellite of Syria in the Roman Empire. So, if Christ was a Syrian citizen, when did you become Christian? Anyway, I lived most of my life with my neighbors and Muslims and Alawites and Druze and a lot of backgrounds in Syria. I had Muslim friends, neighbors, and my experiences are typical of life in the region. Although there would be a Christian quarter in a big cities, it was certainly not a ghetto. We lived everywhere. You can't say in Syria there is a Christian city. No. There are little towns, maybe the majority are Christians, but as Christians we lived all over Syria, not in a specific area. Christianity gave the Christians the ability to be the light. Christians worked with their Muslim neighbors. We went to school together. We worked together. And we celebrated Muslim as well as Christian feasts together. Faith was not then a cause of division or hostility in the Middle East. Christians have always been deeply involved in politics, leading political parties as well as social movements such as Pan-Arabism. Do you know this Arabic Arabic feeling, Arabic belonging? So the Arab world, this movement in the Arab world was established actually by Christians. The Ba'ath Party, have you heard of the Ba'ath Party in Syria and Iraq? Was founded by two Christian leaders. And then the party was hijacked by two dictators, one in Syria and one in Iraq. But originally it was founded by Christians. One of our prime ministers was Christian, prime minister in Syria. And he was at the same time the religious property officer in the cabinet for all the religions, even for the Muslims. And also, he was one of the United Nations founders. If you go to New York, you see his name, Faris al-Khoury, as one of the UN founders. I am sure there are many more examples I can mention in the whole region. We did not live in the shadows. In our communities and countries, we did not hide. Let's all remember that Christianity was not exported from the West to the Middle East, as many would like to think. Our faith was born in the Middle East, and so much of the culture we discover in the Bible is Middle Eastern culture. If you don't understand the Middle Eastern cultures, it is very difficult to understand the culture of the Bible. Christ was not born under Big Ben, as I say that to the British, and not under the Eiffel Tower or the CN Tower in Toronto. He was born in Syria. The majority of the Middle East was Christian for nearly 600 years before even Islam started. Sadly, a lot of Muslims in the Middle East sometimes forget that Christianity started in Greater Syria, and they believe that our faith has been imported from the West, and that Christians are automatically agents of the West. Even more sadly, the West seems to see Christianity as Western phenomenon. And I tell you, in the last 17 years, more and more, I see and I saw before the last couple of years, we were invisible to the West. The West did not know that we even existed. Christians, as well as other minorities in the Middle East, have shared life with Muslim majority in all aspects. They served alongside Muslim in the armed forces. They were part of the liberation movements against foreign occupiers like the French and the British. Syria and Lebanon were French mandate, and Palestine and Jordan were British mandate. And we took part in the movement of the independence in Syria, in Lebanon, and all the Middle East. We've been giving a lot to the Middle East. We have been writers, business people, politicians, scientists, and everything. It is so painful when people look at me as a Christian and see only a poor victim these days. You know, they look at me and say, I'm so sorry. The Christians are suffering. That's all what they see in Christianity in the Middle East. Suddenly, we are visible, but we are the victims. I want to tell you something. We do not see ourselves as victims. We see ourselves as part of the whole tragedy of the Middle East, whether other minorities or whether the Muslims suffering. They see, we see ourselves partners in the land. We see ourselves partners in the good times and in the bad times. Unfortunately, we still need a lot of work when it comes to citizenship, because in the Middle East, the concept of citizenship is underdeveloped, and we need to look what citizenship means. One fact you must remember about people in the Middle East: we are religious by nature. It's almost by DNA. We breathe religion and faith. Even for people who have in their lives, practical life, they don't go to church or they don't go to the mosque, they have nothing to do with religion. Try to offend religion, any religion, in front of them. Suddenly, they become more Christian than Christ and more Muslims than Muhammad. Suddenly. Just, throw a word in front of them and see what happens. It would be devastating for the Middle East if the Christians and other minorities were to leave for two reasons. The first reason is that Muslims, if we left the Middle East completely, Muslims would have demonstrated to the whole world that they couldn't live with people of other faith, which is against Islam, as I and many Muslims understand it. The second reason why it is devastating, it is devastating for the Christians around the world. You know why? Because we would also have proven that we are not the body of Christ that Christ wants us to be. So let's move now to asking a question. What is happening in the Middle East today? Today, We are witnessing, don't leave now after you hear that. We are witnessing a third world war in every sense and on many levels. We have in the Middle East a proxy war. The world is divided into camps that push the region in different directions, not only through political alliances, which include regional and international powers, but also through supporting different fighting armies on the ground. ISIS has some countries supporting it. The oppositions in Syria have some countries supporting it. And the regime in Syria has some countries supporting it. You see what I mean by proxy war? The violence that is taking place there has not been seen by the world since the Second World War. And the region, the Middle East, has not seen such atrocities, you know, since when? Since Genghis Khan. 1259, 1260, when Genghis Khan invaded the Middle East and entered Syria. Can you imagine? The atrocities that are taking place now, we have not seen in the Middle East since 1259. We need to understand that minorities in the Middle East, again, I emphasize, are not imported from somewhere else, as is in the case of Western world. The Middle Eastern minorities belong to the very original fabric of the society. They have always been there. In most of the Western countries, the minorities have been mostly immigrants. The region has a very complex demographical map because the minority in one country is to be found as the majority in the neighboring country. Too much? I'll give you an example. In Iraq, the Sunnis are minority. A big minority, but a minority. The Sunnis in Syria are the majority. The majority in Iraq are Shia, where in Syria, the Shia are minorities. You see how complicated it is? Demographically and religiously. Because of this and complex social and demographic mosaic, it is imperative to understand the dynamics of the relationships between the different religions and denominations if we want to understand what is happening in the Middle East today. The violence and the political unrest that are taking place now are wrecking, destroying the whole social and religious structure that has shaped and strengthened the area for centuries. Now this structure is collapsing. In history, there was some minority persecution, but nothing like we are witnessing today. Christianity, in particular, has gone through some difficult patches, but we survived all the pressure and the persecution without reverting into violent retaliation. And even today, we do not retaliate with arms. The only exception was the Christian, what they used to be called the Christian militias in the war in Lebanon, in the civil war in Lebanon. There were Christian militias. This was the only exception since the Crusades. Because when the Crusades came, in the name of the church, Christians and Muslims fought the Crusades together in the Middle East. The minorities in the Middle East, my friends, are like the glue, bringing the whole structure together. And the glue now is being attacked and removed so that the whole area would be ready to be divided into sectarian states. A Sunni state, a Shia state, Alawite state, and so on. So what ISIS is doing is helping to prepare the region to be divided by removing the glue, removing the minorities, by killing the minorities and displacing the minorities. Why are the minorities in Syria and Iraq persecuted today by ISIS, which is the most vicious and aggressive terrorist organization in the world? The first thing we must understand is that ISIS was not created by chance or accidentally. Just suddenly we woke up, there was ISIS. The second important fact we should be aware of is that ISIS was and is not funded by some rich individuals, but rather governments in the East and even in the West. The sectarian cleansing that ISIS is executing today, as I told you, to prepare the region to be divided into sectarian states. Because the first division we suffered, I don't know if you have heard ever in your life, and I doubt very much that you have, because that should be always undercover. Have you heard of the Sykes-Picot Agreement? Well, okay, good. I'm glad some of you have. The Sykes-Picot Agreement is Mr. Sykes, the British, and Monsieur Picot, the French, sat on a high tea, English high tea, of course, and divided the area in 1916. And we are still, in 2014, living the consequences of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. ISIS is hijacking Islam to brainwash young people, recruiting them to fight, especially in Iraq and Syria. This allows ISIS to take full advantage of the chaos spread in those two countries as a result of a raging war there. Christians and other minorities have suffered death or displacement in every city, in every town or village that ISIS invaded. I have talked with clergy and families coming from those areas, and I have heard horror stories about their departure as ISIS approached their home places, home areas. In Syria, the area from the borders of Iraq, with Iraq east of Syria, up to Aleppo, northwest of Syria, which is the second largest city in Syria. The whole, from the Iraqi border to Aleppo, is Christian-free area. And that area used to have hundreds of thousands of Christians and other minorities. Hundreds of thousands. Now the Christians that could escape have done so. Those that stayed behind are no more. Unfortunately, the Western countries have taken the wrong decision to attack ISIS through airstrike. Airstrikes cannot be the solution, my friends, to the problem. It only adds to the casualties and destruction in the region. The only solution for the evil body, the evil organization of ISIS, is to dry out the external resources that it relies on and to cut all the veins that are carrying blood to this evil body. Military action is only, for me, is only a distraction. It's not a solution. The West is trying to put on a show that they are doing something about it. But actually, billions of dollars are poured into ISIS every day. They are exporting oil. Who is buying the oil? Why can't we ask these questions? Who is paying money to those monsters to destroy the Middle East? Who are supporting them? As long as ISIS is getting the money and is able to sell the oil, no airstrikes can destroy it. And it will grow even bigger and more powerful. Today I heard another town with a lot of Christians in Iraq fell in the hands of ISIS today. And you know what they said? We can take Baghdad anytime we want, but it's a tactical decision that we are not entering Baghdad. How can we stop that? By airstrikes? It's a joke. In order to stop ISIS, we need also to find a political and religious solution to the war in Syria. The West speaks rarely, if at all, of any political solution. But we need to remember that a religious reconciliation should accompany any political solution in Syria. My friends, when we have enemies, we need dialogue. When we have friends, we have company and life together, right? So dialogue is not there to serve friends. I didn't have dialogue with John Paul today. I lived with him because we considered each other friends. I didn't conduct dialogue with him all day. It would have been awful. Because he's a friend, he's a brother in Christ. Who needs dialogue? Enemies. Those who are in conflict. Those who clash need dialogue. Why are we shying away from pushing dialogue into areas of conflict around the world? When the Western countries decided to arm the Syrian oppositions, they gave me, as a Syrian, also as a priest, who loves his country, a signal that they do not want the war to stop. We all know that neither the regime nor the oppositions can obtain military victory because both sides are being pumped with weapons. The only solution to the conflict is dialogue, not more weapons. Do you put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it? Many of the opposition leaders might ask, and they have asked me, Father, how can we dialogue with a dictator? And I say to them, You both have blood on your hands, and dialogue is not made for friends, it is made for enemies. Friends do not have dialogue, they have common life, which includes conversations in many different ways. But enemies are the ones who need dialogue to sort out their differences and find ways to communicate in order to stop the bloodshed. The oppositions, my friend, the opposition in Syria failed to give the Syrian people an alternative political program that could capture their imagination. They also failed to send the right messages to the minorities to win their support. They welcomed Islamic extremists as part of their forces, which sent a very wrong message, and they made many Syrians, Sunni included, Muslims included, doubt the sincerity of their motivations. I can assure you that the vast majority of the Syrians want the change and want the reform, but what we do not want is the destruction of our country. The struggle of the regime and the oppositions is based on the thirst of power. Both sides want the power at every expense, regardless how many people are killed or displaced. Now, you might ask the question, why on earth should we in the West care about this entire dilemma, fiasco, complicated and horrible problem in the Middle East? Sitting in St. John, in Canada, why would I care? My friends, I think religious extremism is not the problem of the Middle East alone. It is spreading rapidly all over the world, and the proof of this can be found in the many thousands of young people, men and women, leaving their work, their universities, their schools, their families, from all over the world to fight with ISIS. Can you imagine? Thousands of young people, don't tell me they are not educated. They are leaving their universities to fight with ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Terrorism, which is based on religious fanaticism, is the problem of the whole world. And as long as the Middle East is in war, it will always export terror and bloodshed to the rest of the world. The international community must be aware that the warlords want the war in the Middle East to stay raging and in time spread to more countries. Therefore, we are all responsible to stand up and raise our voices and make pressure on our politicians to start the political process in Iraq and Syria to end the devastation and the human tragedy there. I'm here today to urge you to ask the difficult questions that many of our politicians do not want us to ask, and also the media is avoiding. It is time to raise our voices and start being a prophetic voice in the society, which does not fear anyone who is trying to silence us. When we see evil around us, it is our responsibility to create a counterforce, equal in power, opposite in direction. Religion is an important part of the conflict. We have to admit, my friends, religion, I don't believe a second when some people in London, they used to say, oh, well, Father, it's all about politics. Yes, it is politics, but it is also religion. And we have to make religion part of the solution. Otherwise, political solution alone does not work in the Middle East. The time has come that we demand from our governments to stop those who are funding and fueling religious extremism with money and arms. We must name them and shame them, because they are destroying the future of our young generation and spreading horror all over the world. The war now is open, and you never know when and where terrorism will hit and shatter innocent lives, which might be a member of your family or one of your friends. We said goodbye to a soldier in Ottawa. We must work together to stop warlords controlling our destiny and making our lives hell. We still can do a lot to bring balance to evil by being a force of good. Help us. Help us at the Awareness Foundation. We are one voice only. We are working day and night, tirelessly, to work with young people in the Middle East, to make them ambassadors of peace, to make them count in their stand against violence. We have a program in the Middle East. I just came back from Syria last week when we gathered 90 young men and women, 90, in the suburb of Latakia, and trained them to be leaders in their communities, to deal with their differences and embrace their differences and celebrate their similarities and be a force of peace and good wherever they are. My hometown, my friends, tripled in its population, because of all the people pouring from other parts of Syria. So the 90 people we had were from all over Syria. And we prayed together, and we talked, and we discussed the conflict. And we put action plans, and we have a year ahead of us, full of work, to execute this plan, that we can make cells everywhere to spread the culture of peace, the culture of life, not the culture of death, the culture of revenge. We are entrusted with the ministry of reconciliation. The question is, are we up to it? Are we ready to be counted as Christians not only by name, but by action? Thank you very much.